Welcome back to Courtroom Chronicles with the County Attorney. And today, Kent, we have quite a guest. Bill Wallace, Bowtie Bill, our bureau chief for the Major Crimes Bureau, finally joins the
Yes.
podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
And this is a pretty wide-ranging county. What we're going to talk about today is there's a lot of rich history throughout Pinal County, and occasionally you get obscure cases. Is that the right way to put it? And
Yeah, obscure, interesting, very local Pinal County flavors to them.
I'll call it crazy.
okay, your words, not mine. And we're going to start. We're going to talk about a couple of different cases. One of them is one of the more unusual ones that I personally have ever seen in terms of the circumstances involved. And this was in 2015. And Bill, you're not just talking on behalf of this case. You actually prosecuted this case back in 2015.
Yeah, that's right.
Mike, hold on. We got to set a little context for our listeners here. So most of you are probably familiar with Pinal County, but just to put this in context, Pinal County is historically a mining and agricultural community. We're primarily rural. We're roughly the size of the state of Connecticut. We now have about 500,000 residents, but that's not always been the case. Over the last 20 years, we've seen a huge influx of a lot of people moving into our community, but we still have very remote parts of our county. It's only about 17%, give or take, is actually privately owned. So we have tribal land, we have national trust land, we have park land. I mean, we've got all state trust land, all of this land that's everywhere. So being so large, we get some remote areas and we get some really sort of eccentrics, I guess is what I would describe it. And I think it's important that you have that kind of context of Pinal County, because this doesn't make sense if you think of an urban community. If you think of Casa Grande or Maricopa or Santan, doesn't make so much sense. But I think with that context now, this will make a little more.
Yeah, we're going to fill in the details here in a second, but this case, the crux of it is, well, first let me ask, you deal with a lot of aggravated assault cases, Bill. Yes. Typically, aggravated assaults involve what type of weapon?
So yeah, you're right. Typically it's a gun or a knife. Like 95% of our cases are guns and knives. On the outside, we get some interesting or different ones.
How often is it a snake?
It's one time.
One time. That's the case we're going to talk about here. Is the portion of the aggravated assault we're talking about is somebody using literally a snake, a rattlesnake, instead of a gun. Well, there's a gun involved too, yeah. But instead of a knife, there's someone is actually assaulted with a snake. So this starts in Oracle, very small town. I believe there's a backstory a little bit between. I mean, he knows he goes to this home, or Bill, you kind of fill it in from there.
Yeah. So Oracle's a small mining town. I think it's probably more people are familiar with it with Biosphere 2. It's very beautiful desert area, but this is a small community. This is a trailer park. The defendant in this case didn't like the victim because he thought he was, in quote, a rat, that he was telling on other people doing bad stuff in the trailer park. So he went to his house that day to intimidate him to stop talking about what was going on in the trailer park.
And so he goes to this home, and we'll fill in some of the details, but I actually want to play about a minute's worth of the 911 call that was made to dispatch, and it's one of the more memorable calls I've heard, so we'll play that.
911, what's the location of your...
Yes.
What are you reporting?
There's a man with a gun and snakes in a bucket, and he's inside, and the guy that took the guy that Brent has the rental, he left with somebody else because...
Okay, what is the guy doing?
And I think he shot the other guy that lives there.
Okay, what do the snakes in the bucket have to do with anything?
They're rattlesnakes. They're scary.
Okay, what do they have to do with him shooting someone?
He has them.
Okay, were they involved in his shooting?
The snakes?
No, was he involved in shooting the other person? The snakes, were they involved?
The snakes are animals, rattlesnakes.
I understand, but I don't understand why you brought it up.
Because
he
brought them there. I wanted the officers to know he has them there.
Are there any injuries or weapons involved?
I just told you they think he shot somebody.
I understand that. I'm asking if there's any weapons or injuries.
Evidently, there's a gun.
Okay, so obviously a lot going on there, Bill. So I think the Pinal County Sheriff's Office were the ones that investigated this case. They arrive, and what did they find?
So they arrive. They find the defendant is still inside the house. He has brought with him two different distinct weapons. One, it was the gun, but his weapon of choice was a rattlesnake. He had tried to get the rattlesnake at first to bite the victim because he was a rat, and he wanted the snake to bite the rat. When the snake didn't bite the rat, he shot at him. And when he missed, then he grabbed a board and he hit the guy in the head, the victim in the head. And that's when the police got there. They were able to get the defendant out of the residence. They secured him. They were able to locate the rattlesnake. It was in a bag, as it was described, as well as they found the gun that was tucked into some cushions in the sofa.
So you kind of alluded to it, but he tries to get the snake, like the snake didn't want to bite, or wasn't hungry?
The snake didn't bite him. The law enforcement here, to their credit, gave the victim a piece of paper and asked him to draw a picture. And he drew a picture of a man holding a gun and a snake and trying to get him to bite him.
And that's what we have. That's what we have up on the screen here. Now, what value was the sketch? Just to
it wouldn't have any real value at all, because we could have introduced it at trial and it would have been entertaining, and it's lived on in Pinal County lore within our office. We keep a copy of it, but typically you would just have a victim describe he had a gun in one hand and a rattlesnake in the other hand. And he was trying to get the rattlesnake to bite me.
I mean, here he is in his own words, kind of describing what happened when that defendant came into the home.
He walked out and then he walked back in, right? He was really nervous, and he still had the snake, and he said, I want to make sure. He says, I want you let this rattlesnake bite you. And he tried to put that rattlesnake close to my arm. It was about, I'd say, it was 5 inches away from my hand, 2 inches from my hand and 5 inches from my arm. And he told me to make sure that I hold my arm up there, right?
And you did?
No, I didn't.
When you first hear of this case, or when it's assigned to you, or however it came in, what is your... I'm reading through the report here. The victim says, the suspect, who was 37 years old, came into the house, tried to make a snake bite him, shot a gun in the house, and hit him on the head with a board. What is your initial reaction?
It's, number one, you have to feel sorry for the victim. You just went through something probably fairly traumatic. But then you get a little bit of entertainment value of imagining someone trying to get another person bit with a rattlesnake, as well as being able to charge someone with aggravated assault with a dangerous instrument, a rattlesnake. And sometimes you get a car, a baseball bat, or machete, but in this case, it was a rattlesnake.
Yeah, and Kent, this happened just before you came into office, but you've obviously been aware of this case for years. It's hard to not laugh a little bit when you hear about this.
It is. Bill's right. I mean, you do feel bad for the victim, but we've still been waiting for that case to be topped. And in my 7.5 years here in this office, we have yet to see a replica of a snake being used, or a more interesting weapon than a rattlesnake.
So, I mean, the actual offense here was fairly serious, right? Aggravated assault is what it's a high-level felony?
A Class 3 dangerous felony.
So what ends up happening with this guy?
So one of the first things is we have pictures of the rattlesnake. And, I mean, imagining going to trial, I have to prove that this is a rattlesnake for it to be a dangerous instrument. So we reached out to the Tucson Herpetological Society and got an expert to identify the rattlesnake as an Arizona black rattlesnake. So now we have a little bit of expert testimony ready to go to prove that this is a dangerous instrument. And then that facilitated a plea agreement with the defendant at that point.
Because you were basically able to prove that, hey, because what did the herpetological people tell you?
This is a rattlesnake. If someone gets bit by this, it could cause very serious injury and potentially death.
So there's talks of a plea agreement. What was their thinking? What ended up happening?
So we offered a plea agreement. The defendant would have to agree to go to prison for somewhere between 7.5 and 10 years. I mean, if he had gone to trial, he would have faced much more serious consequences. He agreed to that plea agreement, and ultimately the court found aggravating factors for him because he had prior felony convictions. He actually also tried to influence the witnesses to not come forward in Oracle. From the jail cell, he had made phone calls to try to get people to not come forward. And the court, finding that aggravating, gave him a sentence of 8.5 years in the Department of Corrections.
I mean, so we laugh about it, but I mean, it's a pretty serious penalty in terms of what. Now, do we know why? You kind of alluded to it earlier, but like, I mean, he had a gun, so like, what? Why a snake?
So he was known in that area for, I don't know, like a rattlesnake tamer. Like he always had them on him. There's other cases, we've had other police reports involved with him where he had rattlesnakes with him. There was something about rattlesnakes. I don't know how frequent you come across rattlesnakes in Oracle, but he liked them.
I think there's also a sheer amount of terror, though. You know, it's one thing. Obviously, I don't want a gun pointed at me either, but the sheer fact that you're holding a gun and a rattlesnake, known as a rattlesnake tamer, and it's going to bite me. I mean, that's a whole new level of terror that I think he's imposing. I really think that was what part of it was.
And just really lucky that I guess the snake just didn't want to bite.
Exactly. Yeah. Because, I mean, who knows how long it would have taken to get medical attention to someone in Oracle.
So that 37-year-old, good point. That 37-year-old defendant, though, I think was ultimately released. And we're not going to use his name for obvious reasons in this, but he was, I think, released from the Department of Corrections in 2022. So we know what ended up happening with the defendant. What happened with the snake?
Oh, it's a real funny story because the sheriff's office, I don't think, knew what to do with the snake. And
well, it's evidence.
yes, that was their thinking, was they had to impound and collect the evidence. But where do you put a snake at the Oracle substation in the sheriff's office? What better than the jail cell? So they put it into the jail cell in the bucket, and they put a cone on top of it. But the wily snake was able to get out of the bucket, and then they had to call the Game and Fish, who took the snake and released it back into the wild.
So best we know, it's living a happy life somewhere.
Exactly, yes.
That is, where does it rank? And you've seen a lot of obscure cases, both of you have, but where does this kind of rank in terms of just bizarre circumstances, regardless of the level of offense involved?
It ranks near the top for me. Yeah.
I would have to agree. I mean, that's off the walls. I mean, if you came to me and said, hey, Kent, we've got an aggravated assault case using a snake, I would think, you know, is this April 1st? I mean, is this April Fool's Day? What's going on? So, yeah, this is up there.
And the second case we're going to talk about is purely coincidental. I was looking at both of these cases. They actually happened. They both happened in 2015. They happened a month apart. So I don't know what was in the water in Pinal County back in 2015. But this one's a little more thought out on the victim side of things, all the way over in Casa Grande. And Bill, you didn't prosecute this one personally, but you know who did. Yeah. And I know you're certainly aware of the details here. So maybe a lot of people can relate to in Pinal County. Farmer, has a lot of bales of hay. I'm certainly not a farmer. I don't know the correct terminology, but so run me through, Bill. Farmer comes out one morning, notices some hay is gone, and like anybody would be upset.
Yeah, so it's Casa Grande, but it's like how Kent described it. It's on the out reaches of Casa Grande, where a lot of agricultural fields are going on. This victim realized that he was stacking his hay bales in a particular area, and they kept coming down. And then he gets contacted by a friend of his who says, hey, I just bought some hay from this questionable character over here. So the victim, to his own credit, reached out and said, hey, try to buy some more hay from this guy. And when that friend of his reached out to who ultimately becomes our defendant, he says, oh, I don't have any hay available, but I'll definitely have some for you on Monday. So when our victim finds out that information, he takes it on his own initiative and takes some skull cans, chewing tobacco cans that he had laying around, and carved his name in all of those skull cans, and then hid them in the hay bales that he had left out on the field. So sure enough, Monday, he comes out to his fields, and the stack is a little bit shorter than it was before. So he has his friend contact that source. She goes to buy the hay. The sheriff's office meets him there. They search the hay, and they find the skull cans hiding within those bales.
And then I think he was trying to make up, it came from, this other farm or this other location. Is that kind of ingenious, right, on the victim's part?
I mean, you hear like very hard to make significant sort of details to hay to make it stick out from other things. Like guns have serial numbers, cars have license plates. Hay doesn't have anything on there that you can identify your hay from anyone else's other hay.
I wouldn't know, but yeah.
Well, I mean, the other problem is, law enforcement is very busy. I mean, the other thing is, are we really going to do a stakeout watching, a bunch of hay bales out in the middle of a woods? I mean, law enforcement's just not going to do it. So really, but for the victim being proactive, but for him thinking on his feet saying, hey, he wasn't even setting a trap. He was just saying, if I'm going to be victimized, I'm going to make sure that there are breadcrumbs or chewing tobacco trail that leads me to who actually the perpetrator is. So I frankly, normally I tell victims, don't take the law into your own hands. Be very careful. But this was a pretty inconspicuous, pretty safe way to do it that allowed this perpetrator to be held accountable.
Yeah, and it's a stupid question, but I mean, from a prosecution standpoint, how helpful is that when you can say, hey, the lids are in the stolen property?
Oh, I think it's great. It's great for the victim to do that. I think it's great evidence. I think jurors would appreciate it. They would probably say, maybe I would do the same thing myself if I was being victimized, do something to be able to recover my own property.
And do we know the disposition on that case?
That case actually went to trial. We prosecuted that defendant, and the jury convicted him of trafficking in stolen property.
Shocker.
Yeah, this didn't even take a really long time for the victim to think about it. To me, what stands out is this was actually pretty quick thinking. It's stolen initially, and then right away he's like, oh, I'm not going to let this happen twice. It's not like it was the 30th or 32nd time. I mean, he came up with this plan pretty quickly.
Certainly. I mean, but then again, that's his livelihood. I mean, realize that he is, growing this hay to sell to be able to either feed his animals or to feed his family. And I mean, this was his livelihood. So he had, all the skin in the world in this game, and he was proactive. I tip my cap to him.
All right. And Bill, I know you've been chomping at the bit to get on the podcast. Yes. I don't know what your experience was like, but I think this is a really good, you guys get a lot of serious cases, and we're not trying to minimize. I mean, like in this, there were victims, there was a theft victim, right. There was somebody who was threatened, but it does kind of show that you really do see all types of cases, and some of them do happen to be a little on the obscure side.
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of cases that we deal with in my bureau, there's victims, and there's real victims, real harm, real trauma to them. But occasionally, we can have a little bit of fun, and it just goes to show, like a lot of the attorneys here in this office really enjoy what they do. And when the cases come across that you can have some fun with and share some stories with people, it can make the job even more enjoyable.
And that sketch of the gun and the snake, I think, is etched in Pinal County history now.
Yes.
It's going to live on a lot longer than us.
I almost think we should make a plaque where that is the focus of it.
We'll put it in the front lobby. Yes. So, hey, if you at home have any ideas on maybe obscure cases or know of some that we're not thinking about, feel free to reach out to us. We're always looking for ideas to chat about, certainly when it comes to crazy Pinal County cases. Let us know, and we'll feature them on a future episode. But, Bill, I know you're usually tied up with our major crimes duties, but I'm glad you could stop by, and hopefully you're not going to take my job hosting the podcast going forward. But
I've offered.
You definitely offered. And then Kent, as usual, appreciate the time, and same for you, everyone who watched or listened at home. We'll see you next time on Courtroom Chronicles.
Thanks.